It's great to see everybody here, both on this stream and on our live streams as well. And I would just like to introduce myself. I am Ryan Wright. I am our events coordinator at MUNers Across Borders for the World Model UN Day 2023 Summit. And today I have with me Jacqueline Witt. And Dr. Jacqueline Witt, it's important she earned that doctorate, is the Chief Learning Officer and the Director of the Organizational Learning Unit in the Office of Policy Planning and Resources for the Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs at the Department of State. That's a long title. Jackie volunteered with American Model United Nations from 2003 to 2022. Nearly 20 years, serving as a committee chair on the executive committee for 6 years, including as the president of the General Assembly and twice as Secretary General. In 2015, she joined the executive office as the associate executive director, and her Bachelor of Arts is from Hollins University in Roanoke, Virginia, in history and international studies. And she earned her Master of Arts and Doctorate of Philosophy in military and American history from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. So welcome. Thank you for joining us, Jackie.
Thank you. I'm so very happy to be here. And shall I jump into remarks and then we'll do Q&A? That's the plan, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Go right ahead.
Fantastic. Well, the first thing that has to come out of my mouth after hello is a disclaimer that everything I'm about to say is my personal point of view and not the official opinion or policy of the Department of State, the United States government, or any other organization that I am affiliated with. But I want to talk to you today about everything I know, or everything I need to know, I learned in Model UN. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Model UN changed my life. Over the last 25 years, give or take, Model UN has shaped my worldview and how I approach my work and my career. Model UN has been where I have found some of my dearest friends and increasingly my closest colleagues and mentors. These days, when I read or I listen to the news, or God forbid, open Twitter, the world is a lot to take in. There is crisis after crisis and tragedy upon tragedy, and so much of it seems to be of our own making. And it would be so easy some days to throw up my hands, crawl back in bed, and just ignore it all. And yet this is not the choice I make. And honestly, my couple of decades of Model UNing helps me make that choice. So today I want to share with you 5 lessons that I have learned from Model UN and that I continue to learn as I move through a career in and around the world of international relations. So the first lesson is that the value of curiosity, collaboration, creativity, and diversity are really key when trying to solve hard problems. So my first Model UN assignment was representing Spain in a one-day middle school Security Council meeting. I so vividly remember the flag and the placard and getting dressed up in professional clothes, which as a 12-year-old is a sort of strange thing to do. And I had done the homework and I had prepared as best I could, but honestly, I didn't know what I was getting into. And it turns out this was 1994 and during the genocide in Rwanda. And that felt like a lot for middle school kids to tackle. Now I can't really quite imagine what the organizers were thinking, putting that on a middle school Model UN agenda. But I remember now the optimism that we brought to the problem, the certainty that we could do something, the certainty that we should do something. And in hindsight, right, this turns out to be one of really the horrific collective failings of the post-Cold War international order. And we were being introduced to it as middle schoolers. But as 13 and 14-year-olds, of course, we didn't know that. We didn't know the international ramifications. We didn't know the international system. We simply saw a country and a people in crisis and our impulse was to respond. And I still wonder how we might recapture some of that youthful optimism, tempered by what we now know about the realities and constraints of international politics, logistics, ethnic violence, in order to solve these problems. Model UN taught me over and over again how important it is to bring people with diverse backgrounds, perspectives, skills, and personalities together. And when you challenge people to do hard things together and give them tools and resources, and that's really important, I think more often than not, they accomplish them. In my job now, I'm learning these values again and again, that when you have big problems to solve, you have to purposefully build teams with diverse backgrounds and perspectives and expertise in order to open up space for real problem solving. The second lesson is one about strategic empathy and perspective taking. Model UN helps us see the world, or at least try to see the world from a different perspective than our own. In high school, one of my most challenging assignments was to represent Saudi Arabia in a meeting simulating the Arab League. And I remember even at that time thinking, how could I, a white teenage girl from a public school and middle class family in North Carolina, possibly understand or even embody the policies of the Saudi regime? But I took the challenge. I prepared by reading everything I could find, by talking to people who had lived and worked there, by trying to imagine what this government, this society that was so different from my own, wanted and needed. And in retrospect, I'm not sure I succeeded fully, but I did try. And that trying was a valuable lesson. So before I joined the State Department, I was a professor of strategy and national security at the Air War College and the U.S. Army War College, both schools to teach professional military education to military officers. And I had the privilege of teaching both U.S. and international officers there. And one of the most important lessons I hoped to impart was about strategic empathy. For example, we can think unequivocally that Russia is prosecuting a war of aggression and choice against Ukraine. And at the same time, we can understand the strategic logic that Putin and Russian military leaders may be using to make decisions. Strategic empathy is about really understanding someone else's desires and constraints, their interests, and what they want to accomplish. And in fact, I think formulating a sound strategy to respond to Russian aggression in Ukraine actually demands this of us. If we write off our opponents or our adversaries, or just those who disagree with us, as irrational, this is an impediment to solving problems. And so strategic empathy and perspective taking begins fundamentally from the proposition that the way I see the world is not the only way of seeing or interacting with it. It does not demand a slide into relativism where anything goes. That's not what we're talking about. But it does demand that we listen, seek to understand, and work toward finding common ground. And then holding that ground firm when our collective norms have been violated. The third lesson that Model UN began to teach me is that policymaking is hard work, especially if we value expertise and consensus building. In college at Hollins University, I co-founded our Model UN club. And as a sophomore, I was the perm rep for Ethiopia at the very first conference that we attended. And this eventually became the organization American Model United Nations, where I ended up volunteering with for 18 years after college graduation. And I remember prepping for the General Assembly plenary session, having collected all of the resolutions that my team's committees had worked on over the past few days. And I was both surprised and really encouraged by the breadth and depth of what the committees talked about. And as our team met that night to discuss votes and arguments and various resolutions, I was especially struck by the kind of expertise that one would need to make effective policy in any one of these areas. And we were talking about many. As college students, we had only scratched the surface in terms of research and thinking through the policy implications of our recommendations, and much less the on-the-ground implementation and requirements. And achieving effects in the real world requires the sustained attention, expertise, resources, and effort. And so I think Model UN is a fantastic entry point into the complexities of policymaking. It also teaches us the importance and the challenge of consensus building. Diplomacy takes time, it takes sustained attention and required effort, and it requires a really unwavering commitment to consensus building. Might it be easier for the most powerful to make the rules? Perhaps in the short term. In Thucydides, who is the author of History of the Peloponnesian Wars, one of the key lines that so-called realists in the international relations theory sense have repeated over and over is from the Melian dialogue. And they say that the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. Some other time, or perhaps in Q&A, I can tell you why I think this reading is kind of bunk, kind of not very sensible. The short version is this. Athens, of course, pays mightily for this way of approaching the world. And Thucydides is teaching us a moral lesson, not describing the world as it should be. It's not a normative sort of statement. But as anybody who's done Model UN knows, that promise of consensus building brings great hope, but we also know that it is tremendously difficult to pull off. The fourth lesson is that governments are not the only actors that matter. Informed, involved citizens and publics matter very, very much. When I was leading the content team at American Model United Nations, one of the most fun conversations we got to have was about how to incorporate the growing non-governmental and civil society participation into the work of international organizations. So at AMN, we simulated the Committee of Experts on Public Administration, which exemplifies this kind of public-private collaboration and the use of private expertise. And one day I would love for AMN or someone else to figure out how to simulate the International Labor Organization in a real way. Other Model UN organizations, of course, have NGO representation as formal assignments or informally through their secretariat. And we know that not just organizations and experts matter, from citizens defending their country in Ukraine to the protests going on in Iran to the powerful voice of Greta Thunberg. We know that people matter. On many of the most pressing issues of the day, whether it's climate change, economic inequality, pandemic disease, democratic backsliding, radical extremism, racism, disinformation, food security, it will not be just governments and states that make a difference in either direction. Model UN teaches us both about the possibilities and the limitations of states and international organizations and institutions to shape the world around us. Engaged, involved, informed citizens matter, and it is as important as ever that we take our responsibility as citizens of our respective countries, but also as global citizens really seriously. There are, finally, fifth lesson is one about my friends, which is that there are many paths to making a difference. So I want to tell you about some of my friends, all of whom are Model UN people. Brendan works for the International Organization on Migration in the Caribbean. Shannon is the executive director for Model United Nations and an attorney. Chandra is the chief talent officer for a law firm, and Rachel takes on pro bono litigation cases. Chelsea is a public defender. Gavin, Paul, Mary Beth, Patrick, Luke, Kristen, and Kayla and I work for the US government. Sally works for the Obama Foundation. Alex, Rachel, and Brian are all professors. Kate works at a think tank. Ruth is a librarian. Adam is a physician. Dan, Josh, and Paul work in politics. And Rima, Jared, Neely, and others work for nonprofits. And I could go on and on and on. Every day, I am awed by the work that these people are doing in their local communities, at state and national levels, around the world. Model UN people are smart, interesting, ambitious, talented people, and being around them has helped me create networks and see professional possibilities that I don't think I would have seen surrounded by people that I had not seen surrounded by people committed to making a difference in the world around them. There's no one path, no definite answer. Not everyone follows the same way, but not everyone right works in international relations or politics. All of us are really quite different kinds of nerdy when it comes right down to it. We see this diversity reflected in the UN as well. Its experts, its rapporteurs, its secretariat, its political appointees, ambassadors, and diplomats. The UN is far from monolithic, and it is far more than the Security Council or even the General Assembly. If there is a challenge that we face today, there is almost certainly a group of talented, dedicated people working to solve it. This is the great promise of the United Nations. When people ask me about my job and the somewhat non-traditional path I took to get there, right, I'm now a bureaucrat having come from academia. I tell them often that 75% of it I learned from Model UN. It often elicits a chuckle, but I'm not so sure it's even an exaggeration. My academic training as a historian means I am also good at reading and research and writing. Model UN, of course, helped me with those things too. My experience in the classroom has made me a pretty good teacher and speaker, but it's Model UN that taught me to really look at the world around me, to see that world from another point of view, to build teams and coalitions, to run meetings, to stay up all night and party and get back to work the next day, even though I am much too old to really do that now, to understand different points of view, and to work collaboratively towards solving problems instead of simply admiring them. And so today, having told you some of the things I learned from Model UN that I continue to use and learn every day, I hope you will think about the lessons that Model UN has taught you thus far. Will keep teaching you, regardless of your career path or the course of study. And then when you catch up on sleep and you think a little bit more and you think about all of the things that Model UN can continue to do, I hope you'll continue to think about the lessons you have learned and that you'll get to work to keep waking up every day and trying, no matter how monumental the task may seem, to keep making the world around you a little better.
All right, thank you so much, Jackie. I really appreciated your words, and I very much enjoyed your speech as well. And so before we get into the discussion portion of the talk today, I just want to remind everyone in the chat or in the Q&A, either places are great places for you to put questions. We'll be looking at both. If anyone has any questions for Jackie or questions about careers in MUN in general, feel free to use those features and engage with us. We'll be happy to answer or bring you on stage and let you talk to Jackie and about her experience. And with that, I'll go ahead and start our sort of discussion. Because thinking about your speech, and you talked about how important it is to build teams with diverse backgrounds and perspectives and expertise. And so in doing so, what are some of the lessons you learned about delegation and like the splitting of tasks in Model UN that are similar to what you've experienced in your career? Like what are some tips you might have for students who
Yeah.
struggle with
Well, it's
grading up?
such a good question, and it's a really challenging question because one of my weak spots is that I like to do everything myself. I like to have control. I like to, like I know if I do it, it'll be done the way I want. And sometimes I think that is really common for people who are right, smart, talented, ambitious, is that we all have our own ways of doing things. I think what I've learned in my career and what I learned from volunteering with Model UN is that, in fact, we can get more done if we do it together and if we use different people's strengths to contribute to the collective. Now, what that requires is a really clear vision of where we're headed. So, the first thing, if you're a Model UN leader, I think, is that you have to you have to be the one, maybe if you're the permanent representative or a head delegate, you have to be the one to sort of set the vision, right? To say, here's where we're headed, here's the top line, of the things that we're trying to achieve, or we want our delegation to really be noticed for our depth of research, or we really want to be noticed for the way that we bring other people in. And so you have to set the vision. After you do that, then I think we can do some things like taking inventory. What do people want to do when we're making, committee assignments? Maybe we go and recruit. Maybe there's a scientific or technical topic, and it would be really helpful to have a student with that kind of background in order to contribute to the discussions. And so we go find them. Maybe you have on your team someone who is quite introverted and doesn't really love to just go out and meet people. That's certainly where I was when I started Model UN. And so I wanted to be the one with the resources, with the binder, with the facts right at hand. And this enabled people to come to me, which was a much more comfortable space for interacting. But it also gave me the ability, right, to feed things to my team members, that I didn't have to be the one sort of making the speeches or things like that. Maybe you have somebody on your team who really is great at planning and logistics. And especially if you're having to travel and, right, make travel reservations and hotel reservations and decide where to eat, that also is a valuable thing that the team needs. So I think for me, it really is about taking stock of the skills that you have, the interests that you have, taking stock of the skills and interests that you need, and then matching people up. And then, especially as the leader, you have to let things go. And so you have to be willing to let people do things their own way, even if it's a little bit different than the way you would have done it. Maybe they want to organize the binder or the files in a way that's not the way you would do it. It's probably okay. Right? Google and other things make it really easy to search for things. And so that balance between setting vision and then letting go is really, really important.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think those are some great thoughts on that sort of delegation and sort of how, in those team environments you really have to think differently about you have to understand your people, right? And that's obviously something that we've had to contend with in our careers as well, as like understanding who you're working with and figuring out those strengths and weaknesses and trying to think about how you fit into that puzzle as well.
And helping people get, especially when you've identified weaknesses or areas for improvement, and all of us have them, thinking about what you can do to help people build skills and capacities, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of people join Model UN because public speaking is terrifying to a lot of folks, right? And so Model UN is a great place, and you don't have to start by giving a long or complicated speech. Maybe you start by seconding a motion. It's literally one word, right? Or maybe you start by asking a point of order, or asking a point of inquiry, or making a simple motion, and then over time you sort of build on those skills. And so I think there's so many opportunities for development and growth at the same time that there is for reinforcing skills and interests. It's a really interesting combination.
Mhm. So in your career, like when you went from Auto UN to like the job market and everything like that, did you find that you had similar nervousness to Model UN, or was it a different environment to you?
That's interesting. I always say that I'm an introvert who can put on a sort of performance. So for me, Model
Mhm.
UN and teaching, being in front of a classroom, giving lectures, doing things like this is relatively easy because everybody is. I'm sure you all are lovely, but everybody's a little bit anonymous, and so there's still some distance. But that moment of like walking into a crowded room and not knowing anyone is still really, really terrifying to me. And Model UN helped give me some like techniques for entering into these uncomfortable spaces, knowing that I can pull out a handful of things, or that I can really quickly find something in common with someone. is something that I still use, all the time. But in my current job, I supervise a team of about 15 people, and we have the work of a team of 15 people. I could not do it on my own. And so that process of finding what people are good at, thinking about where they want to continue to develop, and then assigning work, to them, I think is, again, it's a skill that I use every single day.
Absolutely, and from my own experience, that has been the case for me as well. And it's like the MUNs that I've been to, where I tend to take on that sort of leadership role as well, where I'm like trying to figure out. And this is an interesting thing to note in like the large international MUNs. A lot of times, language skills are such a powerful thing to have, not just on your team, but like if you can find someone else in the conference um, who can communicate with the Italian delegation or the German delegation who might not always have those same English skills. So like figuring that out, and then the way I think about my career now doing events or what I've done with like consulting, um, it having people with specific skills realizing that and then bringing that out of them and helping them utilize it to their best strength is something that Model UN obviously taught me and taught you, and it hopefully will teach everyone else who does it, because it forces you to. You have no choice otherwise, if you're going to be successful in it. And then, so one of the other things that you were talking about, and this kind of comes to how we're thinking about perspectives and thinking about seeing things from not just our team members' eyes, but the countries that we're representing, those eyes. So from like the world and different perspectives, and how you learned this through Model UN, like you mentioned countries like Saudi Arabia and Russia that have very different views from like your own and our own. So like without mentioning any specifics, are there any instances in your career where you've had to represent views that are different from your own?
Well, I worked for the U.S. government for 15 years now, as a as a professor, which I had a little bit more freedom, um, literally academic freedom to sort of talk about and express the things I want. Now, in my role as a bureaucrat, as a civil servant, I am in official settings, not like this one, but in official capacities. I'm responsible for, upholding and communicating the views of the U.S. government. And sometimes I do not always agree with those positions. That's probably the starkest example. We see that happen, all over, and it may be a political administration, it may be a specific policy, um, but sometimes we are called on to represent those official views. And I think everyone has to make choices for themselves. Perhaps there are red lines that, in Model UN, it's all fiction, but in the real world, there may be some things that, excuse me, I'm still getting over a cold. Um, there may be some things that you think are intolerable, where there would be that line that you feel like I cannot cross it. I cannot, in good conscience do this. And that, I have not felt like I've been in that position, but that would be a tremendously difficult, like moral and ethical decision to make. And we see evidence of people making it every day, not just in the US, but all over the world. And I really admire the courage that people have. I forgot how difficult talking was. So please excuse me. But the moral courage that requires to really understand your own like moral and ethical center and grounding, and then apply that in your own life. So I think that's probably the most common, is if people are working for a government or for another institution where they have to take on the roles of that. Probably the like the disconnect is maybe higher in government positions that maybe change party or change policies. I would imagine that most people like wouldn't take a job with the NGO that they fundamentally disagreed with. Right, that feels like a different kind of choice. But I think all of us have to have that like that, again, that moral and ethical center where we can make decisions that allow us to sleep at night and that allow us to feel that we can do a part, or be a part of that. For me, I taught in military education, so I worked for the Army and for the Department of Defense, for the Air Force, and I find myself very often having like pretty close to pacifist points of view, and so I think those are things I had to think really carefully about. Like, do I, what am I doing as part of this organization, especially, in the I joined the federal government as an employee in 2008. So that was right in the middle of the U.S. War in Iraq, during the surge. And I thought really long and hard about whether that was a place that I could be, and what I was doing. In the end, I concluded that my job as an educator was still the same, and that I was educating in this environment, but that my role was as a teacher, as a professor, as an educator, trying to get senior officers to be more thoughtful, more reflective, more empathetic to the world around them. And so ultimately, I think actually the organization needs people like me. I had an anti-war poster in my office for a long time. It said, "War is not healthy for children and other living things," and I had that in my office at West Point and in the war colleges, and it started many really interesting conversations with people over time.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and thank you for speaking so candidly about some of the situations that you have found yourself in, and about how you have still found a way to kind of push your own morals and keep your compass with you even in those situations. I think that's very important, and I think that's something that people in MUN can learn from as well. Like, even if you're representing a country that you disagree with, that doesn't always mean that you can't find ways to still contribute to the conversation that aren't just
For sure.
taking the evil perspective.
Right. Well, sometimes
Which,
I think like taking the evil or the most extreme perspective, sometimes it feels to me like the easy way out, and it can become. I think we have to be careful that it not become a caricature of the countries that we're representing, where we assume if you're representing a certain regime or a certain country, like you must act in this way because they have an international reputation for doing so. I think often the most extreme positions can be not born out of really deep research and good perspective taking. And so I think if we can really dig into the mental worlds and the constraints and interests of others, that we often find, maybe not more moderate positions, but we find different kinds of arguments and different kinds of ways to engage.
yeah, certainly more empathetic positions as well. And like thinking about, so in representing, so like you would say that in thinking about those countries and representing those sort of positions, did that help you personally think about what your lines are in your career, or like in your life in terms of your morals?
That's really, I think they do. I hadn't thought about it in precisely that way, but I think you can often be forced to clarify your own position by having to take the position of another, right? And this is one of the things that our sort of comrades and allies who do debate, like formal debate, will often tell you, right? Is that the best way to make sure that you are grounded in your own position is to know and be able to articulate the position of your opponent, right? Um, and I think that I try to do that every day. And one, I try not to think about people as opponents in my work, right? They are collaborating partners with different perspectives from my own. But sometimes it can be very easy to be frustrated, right? Why won't X, Y, or Z person or X, Y, or Z office? Why don't they get it? Why won't they just do what I want?
Yeah.
And they almost always have a reason. And sometimes I think the reasons are not very good ones. and that's okay. That's a different, but that opens up different conversations if we can enter them from a place of understanding and respect, as opposed to anger, frustration, and ignorance.
And I love the phrase you use, collaborating partners with different views from our own.
Yeah,
We need
and
to
like very like
we
it
need to
sounds
take
like
that on in Model United
yeah, it
Nations.
sounds like total like mumbo jumbo, but I think it's really
Yeah.
it's
It is
really
a little
true.
ambassador speak, but
Yeah,
it's
but I
great.
think it's really true.
Yeah, because I think we do try to differentiate ourselves from the debate side of things in that way, where we're always trying to think about consensus building. We're always
And
trying to
this is
think about.
it's a collaborative
Mhm.
effort, right? Whereas debate is
Yeah.
competitive and it's about, one side winning. And I think in Model UN, the again it sounds quite cliche, but we win when we all when we all win, when we all
Mhm.
find common ground and advance together.
Yeah, and like in our conversations with like the UN Communications Office, and that's something they always try to communicate to us as well. They're like, we would like to see less awards in Model UN. We would like
Yeah,
to see more collaboration, more
right.
bringing in NGOs. I thought that was a great point that you made in your speech as well, bringing out like the civil society, bringing in individuals, like the city work that the UN does.
Mhm.
That's something they want to see a lot more in our engagement
Because
with
the world
students.
is changing, like the environment
Hmm.
is changing, the way that we interact with each other. And so I think that's a really heartening thing. My own organization, American Model United Nations, really downplays awards. They're all given by peers. The staff have nothing to do with it. In part because staff often only see right the public speeches that get made, the things that happen in sort of in the big rooms, and we think that it's the participants themselves who know best, who is best representing their country, who is, maybe it's the go-to person on research and expertise and resolution writing, and they may never make a speech, and they may be the ones, who deserve an award for outstanding representation of their country.
Hmm. Yeah, and sometimes as well, like it's those people who make the connections and are able to bring in groups of people
Mhm.
together, which again, such a valuable skill in careers as well. Even if you're not the person
Absolutely.
who's like the smartest or has done the most research, sometimes being the person who can get the perspective of the opposite block and bring it back and articulate it
Yep.
well. Sometimes that's the most important thing you can do. And then so like thinking again back to the jobs. Thinking then about careers and the red lines and how we think about our moral compasses and how those are shaped by Model UN. Like, are there applications or like job apps that you've looked at that you've refused or didn't even like want to touch because they would require you to ignore like some of your strategic empathy or perspective taking?
Yeah. For me, so the academic job market is really strange. It's unlike most others. But it did allow me to really think through, would I want to be a professor at X, Y, or Z school? Often in the United States, those schools maybe are religiously affiliated and have different requirements for faculty, about maybe you have to write a statement about your own personal faith, or you have to agree to uphold certain, standards of conduct, things like that. And I think those offered me really good reflective opportunities. And there were some places where I decided, no, I don't. Even if the job was teaching U.S. history, I don't think this is the right institutional fit for me. I don't think it lines up with my values. And then again, like I think as an employee of the federal government, there are. It's a question I hope I keep asking myself is about my role in the like enormous bureaucratic machinery of the US government and of its foreign policy arm in particular.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. I mean, these are all like important things to think about in terms of like what we can or can't do anymore, and um, sort of what kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier on like the lines that we sort of learn in MUN with those
Yeah.
perspective taking challenges, and how that sort of informs like the red flags that we're looking for in the outside world. um, and then so another question. I don't have a great segue for this one.
Okay.
But so how is consensus building in the professional team? So I guess this kind of goes into what we were talking about with, thinking about bringing people together and thinking about like how important consensus building is in MUN and collaboration. So like how have your strategies for your professional teams been similar to those in MUN? Like how have you been able to resolve disputes between team members in MUN versus your career? Like, is there a difference, or do you find that those are similar?
They're very, very, very similar. I think one of the first tools that I always go to is something I actually learned on the volunteering side of Model UN, which is it's just where I happen to learn it. It has other origins and antecedents, but it's a conflict resolution tool called Grippy. And so, if you Google it, you'll find it as GRPI. Ammon, my Model UN organization, adds an additional I to it. I can explain it in just a minute. But it's a systematic way of working through conflict or organizing your thinking. And the premise is that you have to sort of think of it like a funnel where it's really easy for conflict to feel personal and intense and high emotions, and what you want to do is to like move up and find the actual source of the disagreement. And what the research suggests is that actually disagreements are rarely interpersonal. They're rarely, if Ryan, if you and I were having a disagreement, it's rarely because we just don't like each other. And I just, I don't think highly of you, and I would never like to talk to you again. Usually what happens is that it's a disagreement in some other area. And so if we can find where that disagreement is, then we can work to resolve it. So the research suggests that the top level of disagreement is about goals. So what is it that we are trying to do? And if we disagree about what we're trying to do, of course we're going to find conflict, right? And so in Model UN, I think this is actually quite important, right? What is the problem we are trying to solve? What is it that we are trying to do? Are we trying to decrease poverty? Are we is it an outcome? Are we trying to empower, economic entrepreneurship? Are we trying to what is it that we are after? And we may disagree fundamentally about the goal. And that is that's a place where we can really put in that work. If we agree about the goal, then we move to talking about roles. Who's doing what? What is your role versus what is my role? If we look at climate change, for example, and we think about if we agree that the goal is to reduce carbon emissions, again, a big if we agree on that, but if that's the goal, then we talk about roles. What is the role of developed economies versus developing economies? What is the role of governments versus private sector? What is the role of individual citizens versus states and corporations? And so we have a conversation about that, and that may be where the disagreement is. If we agree on goals and roles, then this is where we add in an I for the organizations I work with. If we agree about that, then we talk about information, right? Does everyone have the data? Is everyone using a shared operating picture of the world? Do we understand, does Ryan have information that I don't have and I need? Do I know things because I've had other conversations that I need to sort of put on the table? Do I need to be more transparent, more open? And so are we operating with the same information? If we are, goals, roles, information, then we have process, right? What's the process by which we're going to solve this problem or resolve the conflict? Are we using the same assumptions about how we're going to do the work and how we're going to get things done? Are we going to use sort of public sector or private sector vectors? Are we going to run this formally or informally? Are we going to rely on sort of delegation to lower organizations, or people going to be assigned to different tasks? So what's the process that we're using? And that can vary if it's an international problem versus a a team problem or a conflict on a team. And then finally we get to interpersonal. If we've worked through goals, roles, information, and process, the grip part, then we can talk about interpersonal relationships as a source of conflict and as something to sort of work through. And that for me has I use this model probably every day in my work life and sometimes in my personal life, um, to really like think through systematically about conflict, about shared goals, about shared work, in order to move from a place of like stickiness and frustration to a place of breakthrough and progress.
I love that. I mean, I've never heard of Grippy before, but I love the way that that's laid out. I'm surprised I haven't because it seems
Yeah,
like such a
yeah, like I said,
yeah.
Google it. It's GRPI, and you'll find plenty
Mhm.
of resources online. Like I said, we like to add the additional I because we think information is a key factor.
Mhm. And yeah,
But
absolutely. Mhm. And again, like thank you for bringing that up. But I
yeah,
think that's something that all MU winners that should be in absolutely in the handbook because there's so many MU wins that I've been both as a delegate and as a chair where you see these sort of disputes and you're listening to two countries have an argument where one of them has information that the other doesn't, and
mhm,
sometimes they don't even want to share it either. Like they're
right.
trying to keep,
They're like what
which
because information is power
mhm,
in so many dynamics. Um, or if you think we're talking about goals and I think we're talking about process, no wonder we're talking past each other, right? That this
yeah.
is like we haven't taken the time to agree on the foundational things first.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And then, like, you mentioned how you thinking about it in your personal life as well. And then so thinking about your personal life and like individuality and how that plays into your career and in your time in MUN. I mean, I do want to say before the audience, I love your hair, but think like that is not the first type of hairstyle I would usually think of when I think of the State Department or the military. So
Yeah.
how do you keep that individuality and how?
Um,
Mhm.
yeah, it's such a great question. So I dyed my hair pink. Well, first it went gray when I was about 25. So um that took a long time to get used to. Just for myself. But I dyed my hair pink when I worked for the Air Force. Um and I did it in large part to make people a little bit uncomfortable. Um, the Air Force, the military, State Department, these are all places where your personal look matters quite a bit, where there's a part to play, um, where your physical appearance is judged. Um, in the military environment, I lived in a body that did not look like military bodies, right? It was female and big and unruly. I wouldn't look very good in uniform, and it was important to me, um, with my physical appearance, to include my hair, to be able to demonstrate that the assumptions we make about people may or may not hold water. So the students, in this case, and my colleagues saw me on one day with, at that time, I was dyeing my hair brown, but just plain brown hair. And then the next day I showed up with brown hair with a pink, streak in it. And we talked about the fact that my brain was exactly the same, that my experience was the same, that everything I brought to the table, my expertise, all of it's still the same, regardless of what my hair looked like. Um, these are conversations that I think are really important. And I also, at the same time, will acknowledge that right, I'm a now middle aged, but I'm a white woman, and that enables me to push boundaries in a different way than if I were a woman of color. Um, right, conversations about hair and hairstyles can be extraordinarily politicized. They can be extraordinarily difficult. Um, and so, just understanding that we all embody sort of different aspects and different places of privilege and different, um, we carry our experiences with us. And I think I want to work in environments where you can bring your whole self to work, where we can acknowledge that people have different, lived experiences, have different desires and wants. I was telling Ryan before, I've got 2 cats. I think they're asleep, but they often join me on video calls. I have colleagues whose children come in who, and I think we are moving slowly, not as fast as I would like, but slowly to a place where we are allowed to bring who we are into our professional lives, where there's not a single mold, where there's not a single way of doing or being. And I think that is critically important. And if I, as a leader, I think I will be destined to have purple in my hair until I retire. If that is a signal to others, that they also can be who they are and bring their full selves to work, then it's easily the best $10 I spend every few months to add more purple to my hair. But it's like one simple signal that I want people to be fully who they are, and to lean into difference, rather than always feeling like you have to fit in, while recognizing that if you're always leaning into difference, if you're always the one who feels out of place, that's exhausting. And so that you also have to find places where you fit, and you have to find places where you're just sort of part of the mainstream and not always pushing, because expecting any person to do that 24/7 all of the time is too much of a burden, and it's too much to ask of them. But I think, again, collectively, we are better off with our differences and the things that make us unique.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, I'm tearing up a little bit because I think that's so important, and you know, especially for students in MUN and for people like thinking in their career. MUN can be such an individualistic activity a lot of the time, because I know a lot of my friends, a lot of the MUNs that I've been to, we participated. Maybe I brought a team with me or I was a part of a team, but I was a single delegation on
Mhm.
my own. And sometimes it was hard to either fit in or find people that I felt like I could relate to on a personal level outside of the professional setting that we were in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is, again, these are challenges, and these are places where Model UN allows us to grow and to stretch, in really important ways.
Mhm. Yeah, and then like sort of on those lines, like a lot of times, you go to a Mod UN conference and you might find, different styles of delegates, or delegates who might not have great personal skills, but who think that, um, being the silverback gorilla and beating their chest the loudest is going to get them the most attention or is going to win them awards. But do you find that that sort of behavior gets you far in the professional world?
Yeah. The short answer is no. And I think the silverback gorillas do get attention. I am not sure that they are always the most successful. I think, again, it's not always true, and I think we have a long. I think we still have a long way to go in terms of creating really equitable and inclusive environments that reward all kinds of contributions. Um, in my experience, if I think about the most successful teams I've been a part of, if I think about the leaders who I want to work for again, if I think about the kind of leader I want to be, I want to be in work environments, in professional environments where credit is shared openly and freely, where we say thank you to each other, where we acknowledge successes, and we also create room for people to make mistakes and grow from them, where we understand that people have full lives outside of work, and sometimes and that families look like all sorts of different things, and sometimes it's kids, and sometimes it's aging parents, and sometimes it's pets, and sometimes it's extended family. So those are the things that I value and that I want to value in workplaces. And at the same time, I recognize that sometimes and especially like in old like traditional institutions, it's the person out front who is getting credit. It's the person who speaks the loudest or the most often. But I think we collectively have to sort of push back against that in the environments that we are creating, in the spaces that we are making. Um, I think in that in that sense, we all have that sort of responsibility to give credit, to be gracious, to say thank you. Those are the things that we can do day to day, in and out. And then we also have to practice speaking, holding our own position, being comfortable, taking up space, sitting at the table, contributing where you can, um, and not just ceding the ground to the loudest voice in the room. That all of us can take up sort of physical and metaphorical space with our voices, with our presence, and we have an obligation then to show up and to provide a sort of counterweight and model different ways of doing things.
And I think that's absolutely true, not just on a personal level or a professional level, even, but I think also on an international level as well. Like we see a lot of the silverback gorillas in the international space, like Russia right now, what they're doing with Ukraine and like what they're trying to do, we should say, and the way that kind of the international community is standing up to that, and we're coming together.
Yeah.
Like Ukraine obviously isn't gonna step back and just let the loudest voice in the room take control of their country.
Think about
So
where I think many people thought we were a year ago, which was I don't think if you told people we would still be seeing an active war in Ukraine a year on, that almost anybody would have said that would be the case, given the disparity in, or what we thought at the time was the disparity in military forces, in capabilities, and what we have seen really is I think the power of coalitions, the power of standing together, of standing up to hold moral and ethical high ground, and it's a pretty impressive thing to see, and it's not over yet. A long way to go. I think we still don't know how it's going to play out, but certainly I think we have seen over the last year um, the power of not just letting the loudest voice in the room
Yeah, and I think that really
have their
speaks to
will.
like the power of spirit as well. I mean, we had earlier today, if anyone wants to go check that panel out as well. Um, the we had four women from Ukraine talk about, and several of them had gone back to Ukraine after going away for their careers or for um, different opportunities. They went back because they felt that duty and that call.
Yeah.
Well, since we have a question. We
I
only have
see
one
that,
minute
yeah, in the
left. Yeah,
chat.
maybe we can answer it really quickly.
Really, really fast.
Mhm.
So the question is, what skills did you gain from Model UN that helped you in your personal and career life? And I think the number one thing is you have to keep showing up. You have to show up every day, ready, armed with facts and with stories and with research. But you have to keep showing up. Um, you get to take vacation every once in a while, but if you're at work, be at work. If you're in your personal life, be there, be present, and keep showing up for the people you care about, for the organizations you care about, for the issues you care about. Um, Keep showing up.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for talking and for joining us today. If you have any like final closing remarks that we can get through before our next session begins, we're,
Yeah,
we're running right up to it. But
yeah. I
thank you so
think
much.
I think I will we'll leave it there. I I truly believe Model UN has the ability to change lives and probably change the world if we will apply the things that we learn from one place into another. So it's been really great to be with you all today, and thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And, everyone stick around. We'll have more panels to go. And again, a lovely conversation, Jackie. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And we'd love to have you here again. All right.
Thank you. Anytime. Yep. Happy to